Hello and welcome to Poetry at the Pad number 8, Lyrical Political. I'm your host, the Repeat Beat Poet, and here on the stage with me we have the wonderful Ross Monaghan. Say hello, Ross.
Hey, everybody.
Ciao. Shout out to everyone listening at home and everyone listening here. Give us a cheer, everyone listening in the room. Love a panto crowd. It's brilliant. No, indeed. So the subtitle for this event is Lyrical Political, and we're recording on the 29th of November after what has been a, fair to say, turbulent few months of political events, be it the rise of populism across the world, both right and left, which is a debate we can get onto later, but obviously the big ones, Brexit, Trump, the mad Snoopers Charter, which you actually mentioned in a bit of your poetry.
Scary Snoopers Charter.
Scary stuff, man. It's full access to your internet history upon police request. For a year, they can just sweep your data. But anyway, we'll get into that later. So, as a poet who I first met doing an Oxjam gig, which is actually, you know, a form of activism in itself, raising some money for charity, can you talk about how your activism interlinks with your poetry?
Yeah, I think through some of the opportunities I've had over the last couple of years working with activist groups and sort of grassroots activists and communities, a lot of the stuff I write is observational. It's about what's going on around me. And I think through the chance to engage in some of the bigger issues, like the refugee crisis, like nuclear disarmament, like environmental issues, about youth management, about youth development, I think it's really important to share your views on that. And I think some of traditional media doesn't really do that. So for me, poetry is a form of protest. It's an idea about getting your words out there and being able to share stuff. And I also think it's a lot more accessible rather than just going out on the streets and shouting and ranting at people and telling people they're wrong about things. I think using creative means to actually engage people in conversation is kind of what I'm into. So that's where a lot of my poetry comes from. It's just things that I'm passionate about, things I've observed, but also trying to start conversations.
For shizzle. Yeah, man, I dig that vibe a lot. And so speak about some of your other work you do as well outside of just poetry, because I know you get into a lot. And yeah, I want to hear all about that stuff. So I think you do youth work as well?
Yeah, I'm a youth worker. I work with lots of different organisations. So I'm freelance as a youth worker, but there's been a lot of cuts to youth services over the last couple of years, and there's also been some incredible programs come out, like things like NCS, which is National Citizen Service, which they're trying to put all these school leavers through. And I was actually invited into their group 2 years ago as sort of a creative activist, a creative youth leader, and we use a lot of like creative reflection, using art techniques, doing drawing, using poetry. So my youth work is still arts-based, but it's about empowering young people, especially that 16 to 18 bracket who are coming out of school and really haven't been given any life skills and haven't really been told what to expect, and their whole life they've been told you're going to be this and you're going to fail. So a lot of the work I do with young people is about actually just giving them the confidence and a little bit of a wider view of the world. Outside of that, I'm a chalktivist. It's a great movement, look it up.
Chalktivism. Okay, tell us about chalktivism. I'm guessing chalk activism? Yeah?
You got it. You got it. There's a lot of blank looking people for a second there, but chalk, activism, you got it. And chalktivism actually, it started back in the 80s, and there was this group that went out and they chalked all over the streets all around the world, and people joined in. And over the last 2 years, again, I've been involved in a lot of protests. And there's a side of protest that can be quite angry and quite aggressive. And when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, I was involved in that, and I used to fight with the police. And I kind of woke up one day and went, well, this isn't doing any good. And people were actually scared of us. They didn't want to have these conversations. And I literally went out about 2 years ago to a big protest in London, took a load of chalk with me, sat down in the middle of the street writing this protest, just started writing slogans on the floor, drawing love hearts and stuff. And before I knew it, there was like 50, 60 people joined in, and everyone wanted to write something, everyone wanted to leave their message behind. And the nice thing about it is it's leaving your mark behind on the streets. It's about telling people your story, but it's not vandalism. It's wash away. You know, it's going to go away. And then last year, when the Syria vote came in, this was one of the big moments for chalktivism for me. Chalktivism. We as a country voted that it was okay to send our planes and our forces over to bomb Syria, and I was really angry. I was really upset. And I actually wanted to come out in the streets of London, and I wanted to join my old school protesters and go and stand outside Downing Street and cause trouble and get arrested. And a lot of my friends went to me, "It's a really stupid idea. You're a youth worker." And I went, "Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I guess not." And I thought, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a load of chalk out into Brighton. And we did a huge mural that covered a whole road. And it was an incredible reaction. We just had loads of people stopped. And as part of that, another thing I do is try and make lots of little films about activism and about sharing. So little mobile phone films. So we just took a phone out and we made a film about chalking on the streets. And then next thing I know, the CND, which is Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, were contacting us, and they were like, "You guys are crazy, like you're going out on the streets and drawing, and people are actually talking." And it just started a movement. So creative activism, and it doesn't have to be chalking, it doesn't have to be poetry, it can be singing songs, it can be drawing art, it can be doing outdoor galleries. So yeah, there's a lot of different aspects to what I do, but I also really believe in some of the work a lot of the grassroots charities are doing with the refugees at the moment. There's a huge crisis in France and in England developing. You know, we're bringing young people over and we can't support them. So I do a lot of work with the Hummingbird Project and the Refugee Council. And that's more about actually just bringing other artists together to put on events and raise funds and support young people and mentor young people. So, yeah.
Yeah. See, comprehensive roundup there of all the stuff you get into. Speaking as a poet who, I've protested, and I've been in protests, like both physically and online protesting is a new kind of force as well, reaching a different audience of people, affecting change in a different way. As a person who's I'd say less on the activist side of things, it's really inspiring having you down to the pad to share that message, to share why you think it's important, and to share why you do what you do specifically. So thank you for coming down and sharing that as well. Chalktivism, I'm gonna look that up because I'm pretty sure I would have seen people doing it and just not connected the dots as well.
If you go on Vimeo, there's a 3-step guide to chalktivism. It's pretty easy. Get some chalk, choose a pavement, write something, you know.
It does sound crackingly simple. I do enjoy that in protest. It's wonderful. And then, but also in the poems that you brought down, you had a lot to say about street art and graffiti writing, and personally, it's one of the things that I absolutely love. And for anybody who doesn't already know me or has heard me proselytizing about hip-hop, I live hip-hop all day, every day, and graffiti writing is often, not focused on as much as, the art of rhyming or, breakdancing or whatever it is. So tell me how you got into being interested in street art, and once again, because, you shouted out a lot of interesting names. You shouted out Wild Style, which is an incredible hip-hop documentary that everyone should go and watch. You shouted out a couple of other things. So talk to me about street art and your interest in that.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think for me, street art was something that I've kind of been aware of growing up. When I was at school, I was really lucky to have an art teacher that really encouraged us to look at street artists and graffiti, and he gave us the history from hip-hop, and I was already listening to people like, the Beastie Boys, the classic, but then, Mos Def, and God, so many other people. God.
Always shout out Mos Def.
Always, every time. And through that, I just started kind of exploring that world a little bit more, and I really kind of got into the history of it. And then I watched Exit Through the Gift Shop and decided I hated Banksy.
Controversial.
I know, right? I'll explain that in a minute. But I could see what Banksy was doing, and credit to him, man. He was bringing messages back out onto the streets in really simple forms that people could connect with, people loved, people were seeking out. And he started a bit of a movement, again, like a bit of a youth movement. A lot of people re-engaged with street art. And street art isn't just one thing, and graffiti isn't just one thing. There's a whole kind of movement behind it. And as I travel around the world, I saw amazing pieces. And I was lucky enough to spend a bit of time in Berlin, and Berlin being this huge, crazy city full of different graffiti crews. But one of the things I loved about Berlin was they weren't just putting up their names. They were actually putting up these murals that were social commentary about immigration and about, about social development, and about the poor districts had these amazing kind of statements against capitalism and against the banks. And it really just engaged me. And when I came back to the UK, there's just lots of people putting stuff out. So I think it's been that process. And although I decided I hated Banksy a while ago, I've got to give him some credit, because I think he re-sparked that movement, and the work he did in Palestine and his recent residency in New York was incredible, Yeah, really, really thought-provoking. So for me, that's kind of where my interest comes in, the fact that we can use these canvases that other people don't really see. A brick wall to most people is a brick wall, but to a real good writer or a graffiti artist or just an artist in general, they look at that and they see it as a canvas space and they see it as a way to get a message across without being confrontational, which I think is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, man, for sure. And the way that you do that through your spoken word as well, presenting an idea and using the vehicle of the poetry as just a way to get a message out to people. I think that's a really important thing, and all the more important for how crazy the narrative has got in recent times, media narratives, political narratives, the stories that we're told to try and make sense of the world. It's very easy now for things to become muddled and for stories to become very, very unclear. And so when you have the power of a direct art form like spoken word or like street art where, you see it on a train or you see it from the train, wherever it is, it's a really immediate feeling. And I think that the power of not only poetry, but obviously the art right now to convey messages to people directly, immediately, where they feel it, I think it's going to become even more important as things get crazier and crazier, as I sadly predict they will.
Yeah, do you know, I'd agree with you on that. I think this idea about media and the way we're fed our news is confusing. We're fed very sort of one-dimensional. This is what's happening and this is what everybody should think. And I may be wrong or I may be right, but I think there's been a kind of social buy-in to that where there's a large majority of the population who don't really consider the way they're fed their news, the way they process their information. And that kind of upsets me, and I think it actually sparks difficult problems within society. So I think it's really important for artists to stand up and say, there is a different way of looking at this. It isn't necessarily one-dimensional, But
true, I do agree with you, but I also think it shows up a second part of that problem, which is the echo chamber. Like, if we're here in our wonderful artistic space, speaking to what is usually a fairly left-wing crowd, I can say that without too much worry. I feel that it's also the artist's responsibility to be able to speak outside of the echo chamber, to speak to people who maybe the classic example right now is maybe voted leave and but whatever. What I'm really talking about here is being able to reach outside of the echo chamber and to take a message outside of people who would regularly hear it. Do you think that the artist has a responsibility to do that specifically, pointedly, or is it just to create whatever art he or she chooses?
I think both, to be honest. I think, I don't know, eh?
Deep.
Well, no, I mean, as an artist, it's great to just create work and put it out there, and we don't always necessarily think about what we're going to do with our art. It's more a response to a situation we're in, and that's totally valuable, and it's great to share that. But I also believe that with the way social media and technology and the access technology is going, that artists do have a responsibility to put their message out there as well. The ghost.
Pad ghost.
Pad
There was just a
ghost.
scraping for anybody who didn't hear that. I really
creepy.
hope that didn't pick up on the audio. But sorry, carry on.
So yeah, I mean, we have the capability to put it out there. We can go on Facebook and we can live feed. We can make videos on our phones. It's simple to do now. So as artists, I think, yeah, let's create content all the time. Let's start things that we're passionate about. But if nobody's seeing that, like you say, we're living in these little creative bubbles, and we go to gigs and we say things and people go, yeah, I agree with you because I already agree with you. So for me, part of the response to that is that I actually go out on the streets and do poetry on quite a regular basis. I will actually just go out, and it's not busking. I'm not asking for money. It's more about sharing that. And about a year and a half ago, started an organisation with another artist called The Bad Poets. And we just literally go out into parks and we go onto the beach and we go out into spaces around cities and we do pop-up poetry events and we get people to come up and speak. And it's quite incredible the way that when you have an audience that comes to a poetry event, they like poetry. But when you do a pop-up on the street and you're using the same poems and you're talking about politics, people stop and listen and they're really kind of affected by it and influenced by it.
Yeah, it's a whole different crowd and it's a different way to reach people. There's a great tradition in London of one-off pop-up poetry events. So in totally mad places, poetry on buses, poetry just in tube stations and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's really important to make sure that not only you're speaking out through your work, but you're also speaking out with your work, and where you put it is a really specific attention to detail that I like seeing poets actually I like seeing them engage with that side of the thought process, because being a poet is not just about what you write, and using the term is not just about accepting it and self-defining. Personally, I think it's more about attitude. Actions speak louder than words. Kate Temper said, "In these times, life isn't lived, it is demonstrated," which I think is a really important quote. And I'd like to know what you think about, like, so I've seen you in a few different sort of situations. I've seen you feature here. I've seen you slam, I think, vocals and verses, and then also do like a charity gig for Oxfam. What do you think about the way you put out your work? Do you think about where you gig, or is it just any gig is a good gig? Do you think about how you put out your work online? Obviously, like, are you charging people for your work? Are you selling your art, or are you just totally giving it out for free?
Yes, I do consider where I perform. I think I like to work with certain organisations. And in terms of that, I mean, I happily work with lots of charities. I won't charge them. It's more about actually just kind of supporting what they're doing, which is a big reason that was at Oxjam. So I think working with charities, yeah, great, do it for free. As an artist, it'd be great if people paid me all the time.
It would be great if people paid us as artists all the time.
But that's not the reality. So I think you have to kind of come to terms with that as an artist, that it's a balance between, as we just said, sharing your work and kind of putting it out there and starting conversations and actually being able to afford to do it. So does that answer your question?
It's certainly food for thought, to be honest, because I hadn't, it's another person's perspective. That's what I love about these conversations, being able to sit down with a poet whose work I've enjoyed, and then get to understand like the reasonings behind that as well. Like as a purely indulgent thing for me, I quite enjoy it.
And to be honest, that's another side of it for me, is like, if I'm really honest, it's quite a self-indulgent thing being a poet sometimes. It's quite nice to be on stage and perform and be able to share your words. So that is also a motivation, is that if I get the opportunity, I enjoy this. So it's not just about, making impact and sending a message. I actually really have fun with this. And I think that's something that I also kind of put across to my young people when I do poetry with them, is that it should be fun,
Yeah, of course, man. Like, if you're not having fun, then you're probably doing it wrong. In some ways, it's not that obviously simple, but you understand. Just a lovely wave of chuckle from the room as I stumble through my words. It's fine, it's fine. No, it's wicked. So I'd like to say again, thank you for coming down. And now we come to the final question, the kind of wrap-up question, the question that I ask each of our guests. Are you ready for the final question?
I think so.
There was a tremble there.
Yeah.
Wicked. It sounds fairly simple. How would you describe your creative process?
Chaotic. Creative process, it really differs. Sometimes I'll go out and someone will say something and it sparks an idea and it's right there, and I write a poem or I create a piece of art or I create a video and it's done. Sometimes something will go around my head for months and months and months, and I'll be like, I need to use that, but it doesn't happen. And then over the course of a period of time, it'll happen. Sometimes it's really considered. I mean, I think probably as a poet and some of the other people in the room, you go to gigs and they're on theme, or you go and do a slam and it's on theme. So you end up actually really considering what you're writing. Did a poem tonight about childhood and father figures, and again, that's where that came from. And for me, that poem happened in 25 minutes. It's probably one of the quickest poems I've ever written, but it also really was very evocative, it's very emotional writing that poem. So creative process for me, it's different every time, but I think the one thing that binds the things that I perform is they've got a bit of purpose. I really believe in what they're saying, and it's something that I want other people to talk about. I think so. They're the three sort of main factors for me in all of my work, really.
Comprehensive. I like that. Thank you for
I'm a talker.
A speaker of words and indeed a wonderful poet. Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause for our feature at Poetry at the Pad number 8, Lyrical Political, Ross Monaghan. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is the Repeat Beat Poet. I've been your host for the evening. This has been Poetry at the Pad. We are hanging out at the Pad, which is a creative workspace out in Dagenham. You can find us online at the Pad TV. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, the whole deal. And hopefully you should hear this on the Lunar Poetry podcast soon. Thank you everyone for coming down. Peace out. Yeah.